Thanks so much, Marty, for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I'm Andrew Satz. I'm the moderator. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Evolve. I'm a serial tech entrepreneur, a data scientist. I pretend to be a biologist. At Evolve, we use computational technology to invent therapeutic antibodies. And so we fail in the computer. As many of you may know, antibodies are 6 of the top 10 selling drugs in the world, but they're very failure prone. 99% of antibodies ever fail to make it to the clinic. And so we use computers to fail in the computer where it's inexpensive, scalable, and fast. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Jerald Feinstein, and I started out a long time ago with the government doing actually early artificial intelligence work and research, building systems for the intelligence community as well as the Department of Defense, and then went on to companies like Booz Allen and Hamilton, and teaching AI in a business school, did some work at Harvard, MIT, and other areas. And then actually at Booz Allen, what we did, we started a series of seminars where we're working with companies like Citibank, a lot of the large financial institutions, actually building financial systems. So one of the big things people ask is, well, what is AI all about? And I'll hit that in a little bit, but the quick answer is it's really a set of learned and inherited responses, inputs and outputs that we learn, and then we try to automate that in a system, that sort of thing. But then what I did, set up a 501c3 when I was at Harvard to actually teach entrepreneurial skills around the world. We're in 21 countries now. And with the people at Booz Allen, the George Washington University, other universities around the world, they're helping, to make this happen. We're setting up, trying to teach these technologies around the world because there's initiative is equally distributed, but opportunities not. We're trying to fix that. So what we've done too is we set up sort of now a network of banks where we're setting up small loans and things like that, because we found out once we teach these people, say in the Congo, how to set up something using the internet to bring capital in, they need just a little bit of startup. So what we're doing is we're helping to do that. And that's my passion right now. But at the same time, we're still consulting, teaching executives how to leverage AI in their companies. That's what we do.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jerald.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. So I'm a long service Wall Streeter. I was at Goldman Sachs for about 20 years all around the bank, concentrating mostly on data and technology and how it was used to drive the business forward, whether it was in asset management or treasury or payments, compliance. I was all around the bank, really driving outcomes through data and technology. And my most recent role before I left was running external data for the firm globally across all of our business units. I left and went to insurance. I was pulled over to insurance by Peter Hancock when he was at AIG, and collaborated with Peter and the chief science officer to try and really help advance from the kind of intuition-based judgment to more evidence-based decision-making through the application of data science and machine learning techniques, loss mitigation, claim reduction, et cetera, across the company. And then when Carl Icahn came in to the board and people started jumping ship, I jumped ship as well and came to the startup world, where I was a co-founder of a company called Crux Informatics, which is started out as data delivery and now is data sharing, as we know, data sharing, and was a real pioneer in that space, funded by Goldman and Citi and Two Sigma. And my shtick there was about the use case and how to get the innovation into the use case. And pretty much my time at Goldman was about how do we bring the innovation in to drive the business forward. I left Crux after a couple of years and struck out on my own. And that is how I came to Bitvore, where I'm the CEO. I've been CEO here now since May. And what we do at Bitvore is we apply NLP, machine learning, transformer models, scouring the world of unstructured data. And we structure that unstructured data and extract the company and the material events, whether that is business-related material events or ESG-related material events, and then provide that information to our clients, our predominantly financial institution clients, and as well are now making our training sets. We have a very large training set and making that available for transfer models that NLP engineers, AI engineers, and finance are seeking to get access to.
Great, thanks so much, Elizabeth. Neil?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me on this. My name is Neil Cohen. I'm a reformed data guy. And our view at my firm is that what we exist for as a venture capital firm is to back exceptional scientists and engineers who are solving real problems with game-changing technologies. So we view AI as one of the things in the tool set of what we do. So it's a question of how do you apply machine learning? Because frankly, I'm old enough that I remember when people actually thought we were going to get machines to actually think, and the Turing tests and all those things that people talk about historically. And none of us even aspire to that anymore. But we've spent a lot of time in the world of applying machine learning to pathology and medicine. We've done it in industrial applications. We've done a lot of robotics. We've done a whole batch of work on space. We've done a series of companies in materials science. And we're about to launch yet another one, which is going to be a whole new branch of chemistry, we believe. And so it's all, we're very excited about the scientific development that you can have as you bring different areas together, as you look at the world and say, what are the real problems we need to solve, and go out and find underlying science that can really break it for you.
Thanks, Neil. Irene?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's a fantastic conference. Thank you so much, Marty. And my name is Irene Aldridge. I'm software engineer by training. I'm electrical engineer by my educational background. And I basically started my career from my freshman year in college programming financial applications. And from there, when I moved into financial engineering, I moved into trading globalization at the time, system architecture. And then I started doing a PhD at Columbia in operations research. I moved into risk management. I took a year off. I did my MBA at INSEAD in France. I came back, I switched into a PhD in finance. I was working in that for a while, and I worked through from running loan desk at the bank. I went through equities research at Goldman, brief stint, and I moved into ETF research. And finally, I ended up on the trading floor in foreign exchange, where we basically developed high-frequency trading strategies, and I was seeded with $20 million to run the fund. And I wrote a book, which is called High-Frequency Trading. And since then, after a few years, a client of ours came to us and asked to buy data. And at that point, it was still very wild because alternative data did not exist. But we said, hey, why not? They had somebody they were buying data from who went sailing for the summer. And so we thought it's a pretty good idea. So we've been selling data as Able Markets for the last probably 10 years. I have another book just came out, Big Data Science and Finance, that basically describes the methodologies and kind of artificial intelligence it is artificial intelligence of what we do and how we do it. But we're also launching a new venture, which is called ETF Pick. You can look it up at etfpick.com, where we help companies, pension funds, et cetera, basically pick the ETFs that are profitable using artificial intelligence. And we would love investment in that as well. We're just starting to raise money for that. So, but long story short is I believe in artificial intelligence. I believe that it exists. It's also called unsupervised learning in my book anyway. And unsupervised learning, what it does compared to the previous generations of data mining or machine learning, it really lets the data speak for itself. or for themselves, depending on how you believe of data is plural or singular. So, and what it helps you do is really, it eliminates a lot of bias. So, there's bias when a researcher, traditional researcher, has to form a hypothesis about data to get any sort of information out of data. And so the hypothesis is a question that basically has a yes/no answer. And then this researcher tortures the data until data says something like, is it a yes or is it a no? And of course, they want to say yes. So they're going to torture the data until it actually says something like yes. But the truth is, this whole analysis is only as good as the researcher and his questions, usually his questions, maybe her questions too. But so what this unsupervised learning is letting us do, or artificial intelligence, is really eliminate that layer of backgrounds and experiences and biases that people have, and really create this analysis that's data-driven itself. So, and this is, I think, is the real innovation and breakthrough. I also teach this at Cornell in Cornell Financial Engineering program in Manhattan, where I'm an adjunct. I also just invited to lecture at Cambridge, where I have been doing it for the last 6 months, Cambridge, UK. So I think it's extremely exciting, and I can talk about this forever, so I'll let other people do that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Irene. So we'll kick it off talking about the technology revolution that's going on right now. Sort of this 21st century growth, it's not just being driven by the massive amount in compute power, but the novel algorithms. Elizabeth mentioned transformers. That's one of them that was really brought to fore in 2017, that have all been created and are doing some amazing feats that were historically science fiction. But we're really in the early stages of this revolution. In our case, we substitute computer bits for proteins, and that unlocks colossal amounts of value because the physical world constrains massive growth in a way that computers don't. So, for example, with us, we can interrogate millions of molecules or therapeutics in days that would otherwise have taken multiple lifetimes. So with all these advances, there's a massive amount of value creation on the horizon. Can you share some examples, Neil, how you've seen deep tech or AI create huge amounts of value? How do you see it accelerating growth? And how do you see deep tech or AI helping grow magnitudes faster than we are today?
Look, I think you have to go back and go to the roots of many of these things. I view AI, and look, I've been watching it for 30 plus years now and building companies in it for the last 10. I view that as a subset of computer science that's very heavily dependent on the underlying ability of data and compute and data in every form and computing power to really do things. I think the underlying revolution in the technology world is much more there than AI itself. If you think about AI, what is machine learning? Machine learning is actually a series of algorithms which are now commercially available. Now, I'm not going to say that what Amazon and Google have put online are the world's greatest. I bet you they're not their best, but it's becoming more and more commercially available. So the question becomes, what do you do with these tools? And the same is true in robotics. The same is true in everything. The next revolution in robotics is going to be getting the drudgery out of setting robotics up. Because right now, if you bring a robot into a factory, it's a nightmare. It makes doing what you guys do in biology look good. So one of the companies that we backed, which we literally took out of a lab at a university, is designed to just get robots up and running faster and make them more interchangeable. That will be the fundamental change that we think will unleash robotic power. Now you go the next step, and what are the limitations on robotic power? We're seeing people starting to work on quantum computing algorithms, simply because what we have is the underlying speeds and ability to compute right now in regular computation isn't fast enough. And so they're moving to quantum computing to be able to make the robots work better. So we're seeing that whole value chain in the industrial world emerge. On the medical side, we've been working with a company where we backed a bunch of literally 22-year-olds. And what they did was they said, we're going to change the world of pathology. And if you think about it, it's really an industrial application in a way. There's more and more of us getting older. We all have more and more biopsies taken, and there are fewer people who want to be pathologists. Oh, by the way, it's the most boring thing on the face of the earth to do. And so what these guys thought they were going to do was do AI for pathology. Well, it turned out that's the easy part. It's getting the underlying data, which these guys have both talked about in different ways. It was, how do you move the data? How do you create the data? How do you clean the data? So what we're learning is the enabler of AI is very much the data underneath it, which I think Irene touched upon a good bit, which is how do you deal with the data and how do you not torture the data, whichever one of you said that, it was a good phrase. How do you not torture the data to force an answer? So you have to really be willing to work with lots of raw data. We're doing stuff in space. Space is a really interesting place because you got a lot of hypotheses about how it's really gonna work. It turns out putting stuff into space is apparently not that hard. The real question is, how are you going to manufacture in space? And there, we're looking at technologies that combine physics, material science, AI, because you need to control it because nobody wants to actually go up there and do it. So we're all going to use machine learning to get the machines to operate, and they'll all be robotic because nobody's going to go up there and sit there and have a manufacturing plant in space. Not going to work, folks. So we're looking at how do you combine all these technologies to do things in space that can only be done in space. And so you have to look at the physics side, you have to look at the material science side, and you have to drive through them. And that will lead to the next revolution in the world of materials. And that'll have dramatic impacts on energy use in certain areas, because it will be much more efficient if you can get some of the impurities out. So these are all areas that we think are just at their early stages. Right now, we can already make pathologists infinitely better. And that's a huge industry. You don't think about it, but every time you have a biopsy done, folks, it's 10 samples or 15 samples, a lot of them done every year. When you go through all these areas, you go through the trading floors, everybody's trying to figure out, how do I get better use of my data? How do I get data that I can actually use? And then how do I make money with it? I don't believe, and we as a firm discarded the hypothesis probably 10 years ago, that AI itself is an industry. It's what can you do with it and what advantage can you get from using the AI? I'll draw the analogy to 15 years ago, if you had a panel like this, people would talk about tech enabled. Right now, everything we look at has AI built into it, or machine learning in all reality. Some of the stuff we're doing in chemistry, the question is, could you ever control chemical reactors fast enough without using machine learning, faster and faster computers? And it becomes a cycle like that. So they all weave together. And I think that what we're going to see is an increase in automation driven by these technologies, because that's already where it's going. I think that you're seeing industries that are almost based on it, because it'll be the only way they can operate efficiently. We think that's the only way you're going to get some of the equity in healthcare, is by driving down some costs, which I know hurts the heart of every biology guy in the room. But at some point, we're going to have to drive down all those costs. And we're looking at ways of doing that using various ones of these technologies.
I just want to pick up a really quick thing. I have a master's degree in artificial intelligence from the 80s, and I knew a bunch of programming languages back in the day. And one of the interesting things about AI, so humans by definition are 2 sigma people, and we want to be a 6 sigma society with very few mistakes. And so you're going to need to have AI or some kind of intelligence built into many things to get rid of the inefficiencies. I mean, I'm sure that investors want to do it. That's how you get yield gains on capital, right? Because the more you eliminate that, the human error, the better. Whether it's in, as you said, in therapeutics or medicine or other processes, military applications, et cetera.
I'd push it a little bit back on that, because I think there is like, computational technologies can get us about 80% of the way there, but the inference that's required in the human mind is where you actually get a lot of those changes, right? A lot of what we've seen, and again, I only pretend to be a biologist, but a lot of the advances that came by accident, right? They weren't intentional. And so you'll miss out on those accidents because of the fact that these big N, where you have a lot of data, and we're starting to see a lot of algorithms come out where you're getting these low N. And that's actually how we operate as humans. We don't have a lot of information. We have these Bayesian inferences that we make to make decisions. And so we're starting to see that. So I don't disagree with you, but I was just wanted to push back.
You're talking about 2 different things. You're talking about innovation. I'm talking about process. So, so it's like the old statistic about technology spending is that the average firm spends 5% of its budget on technology. And of that total, about 5% is spent on innovation, right? So there's that whole 95% slug that is just terrible. And then there's all the processes built around it that are also inefficient.
Mhm.
And getting that to work is actually creates tremendous yield, right?
And I think that's partially what Elizabeth does. I mean, you're ingesting a lot of data with what you're working on at Bitvore. And so how do you think about that challenge of the ability to process and ingest all that data versus the utility of the data itself? And how do you part that signal from that noise?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it's about industrializing discovery, right? So for the use case and using the technology, using the AI to be able to do it at scale, right? So you can find the needle in the haystack really fast. So what we're doing, right, we're scouring the world at Bitvore. Okay, right. Looking at millions of knowledge articles from the news, from filings, from patents, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And we have a very industrialized process from the standpoint of having a series of models, call it AI, call it machine learning, call it deep learning models all together, right, in a set of analyzers, right, that are able to, we ingest this data and then we make sense of it. We find what is the company this article is talking about, right, or what is the entity, and being able to resolve that very accurately, and then be able to resolve and identify, well, okay, what do I care about in this company? Do I care about directors and officers and what they're doing, or the lawsuits that the company is subject to, or the loans they're putting on, you name it, right? What are they doing with climate? Are they polluting the atmosphere? Are they buying or selling carbon credits, et cetera, et cetera? These material events that a company is either subject to, or the company is actually made the decision in taking actions, and then extracting those out of all of this, the sea of text. And, you know, we're looking at millions of knowledge articles a day, and the result, the needles, we may have 5,000 needles. So we're able to resolve that information very quickly. And then the use case, the people who care about it, they want to know, well, what's the hair on this company I'm going to underwrite? Are they going to sue me? Or, you know, I'm interested in an ETF that Irene is recommending, and I want to know, how are they achieving their net zero target? Are they buying carbon credits, or are they actually reducing the emissions coming out of their smokestacks? So our clients, right, the use case is this risk evaluation, which they used to be able to do annually or quarterly. But now, because there's so many changes, like in this volatile world we live in, they want to know, and plus the consumerization with AI, we all are, you know, living in this AI world of, you know, we have recommendation engines talking to us, and we're talking to Siri, and, you know, we have this AI enabled world we live in. Well, we want that in our work too. And so we want to know things very, very quickly, and where the unknown unknowns are, we want to know. We don't want to be surprised. And so this kind of industrializing discovery that AI brings, that we can bring through all of these analyzers scouring the world's text, is a real enabler of having that knowledge at hand, so you don't get bit. That's one of our taglines: discover risk before you get bit. Because that's the last thing that business leaders want, right? They don't want to be surprised. Even portfolio managers who are managing a portfolio of investments, they don't want to be surprised on the upside because they missed something. They don't want to be surprised on the downside. So we live in this culture of, call it fear, call it risk aversion. Business leaders don't want to be surprised. And so the industrializing this discovery, what we do is enables it, it maybe feeds the fear, but it feeds the fear with knowledge, so that instead of trying to pour through a zillion documents and try and glean the intelligence that way, you're able to get it very quickly. And then the use case is, right, then you can spend your time because the discovery's been automated for you. You can spend your time then on really the harder part, which is, okay, now that I know this company is subject to sexual harassment lawsuits, or now that I know this company has filed a bunch of different lawsuits and will probably sue me and insure as well, what am I going to do about that? So the AI has really enabled the really the freeing up of the busy work time and developing the risk profile to quickly giving the world, the business leaders, that intelligence so that they can respond more intelligently, if you will.
If you think about what Elizabeth said, let's combine what Elizabeth said and what Marty said, because Elizabeth and Marty are actually in a way saying very much the same thing. Most of the people in this world are not going to invent the next nuclear bomb or whatever, okay? Most of the people in this world have a job to get done, want to get it done efficiently. And most companies need people to do things and get them done and done efficiently. They don't need people to create the next moonshot. What they need to do is get their work done. That is something machine learning and the things that we all can do to set that up for the average worker can make a huge difference. And that average worker differs from job to job. If you're doing drug discovery, if they can automate it so that you don't have to have 500,000 test tubes, or if my guys can automate pathology so that they can actually have it flagged, bozo, look here to the pathologist, it saves them all a huge amount of time and energy. And that's what it becomes at the end of the day. That has been the primary way. Now, you can argue that using machine learning, using computers, using data, you can actually get things more granularly. And I believe that that's very true. And we've seen that result in healthcare, where we can get down and find things. And it's really bad when your most experienced pathologists in the world have to admit they miss things on a slide. Now, we're not going to go public with that too much, but we actually could, including our own in-house team. And the truth of the matter is, with the work that Elizabeth is doing, the work that everybody here is talking about, if you're going to use machine learning, the question is how do you use it intelligently?
Yeah.
Where's the right place to use it and where's the wrong place to use it?
And here, so I'm gonna drop a little gem that I have, and it's maybe not much of a gem. So in my long consulting career I had coming out of Wharton, I ran a group at JP Morgan Chase, a large bank, who was in charge of offshoring. And so we offshored 50,000 jobs to India, Philippines, and Costa Rica. And the whole intent was, if I offshore the job, I know what they're worth and who's doing it, and I saved $200 million, like for every time I move 10,000 people, right? That's a lot of money to save, and it's easily sellable. But as I offshore it, I have to build out all the processes that I'm offshoring. So I have to know, I gain knowledge of what all my processes are, but the next available step to go from there is actually to make all those jobs, as much of those jobs as possible, unneeded by creating AI around them, right? So to me, it's like every time I look at something, I'm like, okay, great. Can this be offshore? Boom, offshore. What percent of the amount that's offshore can be converted into AI within 10 years after it's offshore? Probably 80% done, right? And then that's where the war should be. So another great example is in education. Like, to me, education is awful in the United States. The problem, is that nobody passes the STEM exams, right? So if you have a kid in a public high school, the overwhelming probability is that their teachers aren't available because they can't pass the exam to teach biology, chemistry, calculus, analytic geometry. It's just there's so few. All those guys are hired away to work in tech. So, but it is possible to go and hire somebody in India to go and teach your kid. There's actually, you can get a great tutor in India for $10 to $15 an hour. If you use an American math teacher, starts at $150 an hour.
Trouble is, your kid will grow up with an Indian accent.
Okay, so you might have an Indian accent, but they're going to be smart. So take that a step further. Okay.
No,
Guys,
no, I'm not
guys,
passing aspersions.
offense. Okay, so,
I'm
so guys who run half of our tech companies in the US today are IIT graduates, right? But I can hire an IIT professor to teach my kid for 20% of what I pay for a high school teacher in Miami, right? So you have to, people have to say, great, we're not, the issue isn't political, is that guy accomplishing the job they're supposed to accomplish, the teacher, right? No, they're not. So I can replace them, outsource it to India, hire the IIT professor, and then get to the IIT professor and say, great, I can actually fix 80% of what the IIT professor does with AI. If I'm a person of a different ethnicity and they learn different based on cultural ways, right? Then we can have AI in place to fix how they're learning, right? To notice the nuance, right? So to me, people are missing that. It's really not, and we had this conversation yesterday. AI is not really where it should be. Right now, AI is being used, and machine learning is used to sell more stuff, but it's not being used for any purposes of making people better.
Well, I'll argue that a little bit.
Yeah,
I'll get back on that one a little.
Yeah, and I would have to agree with that, because I think like we definitely use AI what we're doing, and it's all about trying to help as many people as possible. But I think there's a lot of misnomer around it, right? So like, are you taking a process that needs to be repeated, something that could be supported, right? Because AI can do both of those things. So you're taking auto supporting. Are you analyzing? Are you predicting? And nowadays with the generative models that we're seeing coming out, are you inventing new things with AI, which we're starting to see that happen more and more and more. But I wanted to go back to the idea of value, because what you're doing, Jerald, at Planet Startup is informing people on how to use technology to create value. And I'd love to if you could give us some examples of some of the things that you've seen where people are in the countries that you're helping and the individuals that you're helping are creating new products and value creation with deep tech or AI or whatever it is that the companies are doing.
Well, what we're doing with an organization called Men's Consult, which works in Africa and actually is helping us there, is to go into the areas like the Congo and Central African Republic. There we can meet. We've met with the president and high-level ministers and people like that. And it's very interesting because in some cases, they say, we don't want to make things more efficient because they don't want people lying around causing problems. That sort of thing, where others say, yeah, we can do that. They can reallocate these people to do something else, which is really a creative way of doing it. So we're working with groups in both of those countries now to set up networks of legitimate legal pharmacies, because now people are running these pharmacies in their basements with drugs coming from God knows where, whether they're legitimate or not, or expired or something else. And there we're working with the government to set these things up, set the infrastructure up, have remote pharmacists that are licensed and things like that to kind of go in there and help. Now, what we do is we do this also by telling our people stories about what we've done here in the US. And I'd like to share with you like what we did with Fidelity, because it's interesting and people hear about that. We set up something to allow them to execute trades better than other people. And the idea is, well, what's a better deal? And what a better deal is, the transaction time and cost are reduced, and you get something better. And that's the reason why Blockbuster is out of business and we stream things, because we lowered the transaction cost and time, and then that's better, right? Then what we did, I think Marty the other day had said something that he's heard a lot of people make predictions and things like that, and then, right, they might go away. Well, what happened with us, we actually had a partnership with Google where we actually tweaked that system that we did for Fidelity to look at brands, what kind of brands are better and things like that. We tweaked it again to, because we had a market there, to identify who's going to win an election. Because there's a huge client base out there, because people invest in politicians in some cases around the world. They want to know who's ahead, who's going to win, rather than go to the polls. So what happened, we came up with some things, and somebody in New York heard about this, and then we got calls from WFTL in Florida, to do that. So we did a sequence of interviews, and this was way back in the early primaries. We were right on target all the way through. And since that time, we tell that story. Somebody says, yeah, some country like Ghana, can we do something like that here? It says, yeah, you can do that, but you have to learn this stuff first. and then you can, set up these things. Then we'll share with them the software, but they have to learn the basics first. So by putting the hook and the bait out there, we can get them interested in stuff that they might not be interested in usually. So that's the value creation there. And we're in 21 countries.
So I really like hearing that you're creating value using technology in places other than the Western world, because I mean, obviously we're seeing a huge amount of growth in China. And I think what Marty, you were talking about earlier with the number of clicks, I was looking at a recent survey. It said that about 35% of data scientists are working in big tech. Big tech makes most of its money off of more clicks, right? The AdWords and so I think it's great to see that we're leveraging more value than trying to get people to buy more stuff. But I did want to dig in a little bit into, since we're here at a family office, around what types of questions you'd like to be asking you should be asking companies. We fundraise as a company, and so we often get that question, what data are you using? Which is, a good question, a big data question. But I think it's when trying to understand the value, which is something that you brought up, which could be updated as things like, how does your data connect to the recommendations of your algorithms, or what type of data would you need to grow or scale your business? So when you're looking at companies in the deep tech or AI space, what are some of the key elements investors should be looking for? And what are some red flags for you as well?
This is just too easy. I'm going to say, what we've learned is all the issues that you've raised are way after we get the following 3 questions answered. Who's going to pay for this? What will they pay? And can somebody create it themselves and stop paying you? When we get through those 3 questions, we have killed 80% of the AI companies that we see, maybe 85, with just those 3 questions alone. Most people aren't doing something unique enough and don't have a skill set enough around them to be able to say, who's going to really pay for this? And then people will pay real money and they can't just recreate it themselves. So the reality is a lot of companies are Me Too's, and we try very hard to avoid those. A lot of companies don't have skill sets, which is starting to get towards where you are, to say that they can create a sustainable advantage that people should keep coming back to them. And the real question is, who's going to pay for it most of the time? So we've looked at all kinds of really cool AI, really awesome stuff that gets built into medical devices. And frankly, we haven't done a single one of them because we know that every medical device company can, within 6 months, create their own. Okay, it's not, I once got in trouble looking at an AI person with a major hospital system, brilliant person, PhD from Stanford, from their computer science department and specialist in AI. And I said, look, I know that anything I bring to you, you can probably create a better product in 6 months. So the question is, what can I do that's so different that you would have to feel compelled to bring it to your bosses? And it's a really interesting set of questions, which is why doing drug discovery, which is, I hate to say it, a relatively small niche in the grand scheme of the world, with not that many people who have, you claim you're not a biologist, I bet you're better at it than you admit to. So you have to have a decent amount of biology background to be able to do it, because otherwise, nobody's going to pay you long term. So, I respect what you guys are doing with the pharmacies. I know a group that's out there in Africa right now, building out a Pan-African network to do very much the kinds of things you're doing. I don't think they're using that much AI. I don't think they're using that much other than basic technologies. And that becomes the real question when you look at any kind of heavy duty technology. Is it a solution, a solution in search of a problem? Or is it, are you really solving a problem? I agree, the African medical system with their pharmacies are debacle. So I think anything you're doing in there to get them up and running is amazing. And there's a whole batch of different ways people are going about it, be they low tech or high tech. And so we ask this question all the time: who's going to pay for it? What will they pay? And can they create it themselves and knock you out? So if you think about what Elizabeth's doing, where she's going out and looking through unbelievable quantums of data, trying to sort through it and create a quick answer that I, as a manager, can use for something. That makes sense to me. It's when it becomes just another thing that's a bell or a whistle for something else that we say, no, I don't think so.
Well, you know what's interesting, what you say is right, like the drug discovery area where you could say, well, Viagra was an accident, right?
It was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's remember, it was.
A side effect of the effect. But what happens, what I'm doing, if you we look around at things to invest in, for example, and what you say is right, you know, barrier to entry and all those kinds of things somebody can pay for. But one of the things that we did for one client is look and say, what's some good stuff out there related to AI. And one of the things is, do they want to look at some vehicle that does self-driving? Do they want to do something else? Do they want to do some medical device, right? But one of the things that we know of, they all use fancy chips, and the chips are expensive, and there's a huge barrier to entry. And there's a lot of these companies that are in Taiwan now where they're talk about them, you know, moving stuff out at night before something happens. To move that stuff to the US is about 50 billion right now, the infrastructure deal to move that stuff to the US and build it. So there's a lot of investments going to be going on there. But the idea is that if you look at ARPA, there's these new light wave chips. IBM just came out with a new analog chip for analog AI. You have the ability to built-in neural nets where you can do parallel processing very easily. You've got all this stuff going on. There's about maybe 5 good startups out there that get into not only chip making, but what all the chip makers want, and that's yield management. You know, biology is called yield management, that you were kind of talking about with yourselves. This is yield management with the chips, and every chip maker needs that. I think there's one company that has the lock on that. So when you're talking about barrier to entry, things like AI related to technology, it's one thing, but these chips are used everywhere: cars, planes, rockets, whatever. So that's what we're looking at as some really cool investments.
We look at that in every space that we do, not just AI. We look at all these things.
Oh, absolutely.
We see so many products and so many new technologies. And let's get away from AI for a moment, where you say, why the hell would I buy that? If you ever find yourself asking yourself that question, don't make the investment.
Absolutely.
I mean, and you will be amazed at how many things you'll see that you say, who needs this and why?
Mhm.
We find that it's kind of amazing, and we've done software of all sorts. We've done devices, we've done medical devices, and what we're learning slowly but surely is that we want to go after ones that are bigger problems, which is what you're saying. Is going after some bigger problems, you have a lot more bandwidth for when you have to do the inevitable pivot of your company to figure out how it's really going to make some money. You have enough room to do a pivot and still make money. And that becomes a key issue for us.
That's interesting that you should bring that up. So I'm really curious to see sort of the, you know, from everyone on the panel, what are some of those trends and exciting trends that you think are going to affect us in the next 10 years or so that we should be aware of as we're going into as we start moving into the 2030s? You know, it's probably a little early for it, but you know. Irene, did you have a thought about this? Some of the trends?
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I think 5G is going to bring an enormous flood of data that we do not even comprehend how big it's going to be. And you know, all these chips, like for example, when you check out from the supermarket, right, there's a little barcode that people scan on the counter. Now, these are called RFIDs, radio frequency identification devices, that were invented during the Second World War as an espionage kind of tool, because they contain message, but they don't have batteries, and you need a specific frequency to actually read the message. But these things are we will see them everywhere. And I mean, some people believe that you now get it with your COVID shot, right? I'm not going to go there, but so there are, and apparently in Sweden, people are already injecting these things into themselves in lieu of a wallet or anything along those lines. So this data we don't yet have a synchronized access to yet, but there will be so much of it once 5G comes online that you will need to have technologies to process this. And I think this is going to be a huge innovation, because now bridges will be able to talk to you to say how their strength of their concrete is doing. You know, everything you think about it, buses, all this technology that the government kind of now collects once a month, you will be able to have it in real time. So you will be able to know how many of, let's say, Boeing airplanes are flying today and how many of them are having a malfunction, and it will be all on your computer screen. So I think the innovation there and the technology that's needed to actually process this stuff is just mind-boggling. And this is, I think, where the biggest innovation is going to happen.
I'm a contrarian in general. I generally take an opposing view of things. I agree with you, by the way. I'm not saying that because I disagree with what you're saying. I think 5G, you know, there's a lot of idea around the moat around data as a way to protect yourself. Although I would argue that there's so much data being generated today. You're like trying to create a moat in the ocean, which means that, you know, a lot of the investors are pushing people to build their own ways of generating their own data. So that's my contrarian view. And I'm just curious what, you know, if you have in your space a contrarian view that you use for the application or the creation of deep tech or AI. Elizabeth, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, friction. So friction in the enterprise to adoption. And so I wonder if we're going to have to wait for a whole new generation of leaders. Honestly, like, there's so much inertia, right, in organizations to adopt. So you'll see these islands. We have islands of automation. We have islands of data scientists, AI engineers, but trying to go from the island to permeate the organization to really get value from the AI kind of more as a mesh. That's where I see the slowdown, right? So I think that the technology is going to continue to advance, but we have these things called people, these humans who are in the way. And it's a bit maddening, right? So, I mean, I've been around the block a few times in different large organizations, and you can just see it. The permafrost that is, including CTOs, who I'm known to say they're the death knell of innovation, because they do say, "Oh, I can build that myself," and they don't talk commercial like their business users. So there's this kind of opposing forces inside corporations to the innovation, right? And so you have this whole industry of consultants and system integrators and everything else trying to get the innovation in. And so my contrarian view is that it may take to the next generation of leaders until we really get the pace of adoption that is kind of on par with the capability of the AI, if you know what I mean. So it's about the culture and the people being the blockade, not the how good is the technology, because the technology, the AI, is tremendous value. We see it in our consumer walk, right? So why can't we have that inside companies? And it's the friction, it's the leadership blockade that I think is holding us up.
Yeah, when data scientists are thought of IT professionals, there's a big challenge there. How about yourself? Do you have a contrarian view that you take?
I'm going to go with a perspective that may not be contrarian. I'm going to argue that for the last 20 years of my career, maybe even longer, technology has been ahead of where the users are. And we are going to need to get better and to focus on telling the users why they need to make the change. You know, business people call it building the business case. And I don't think we as technology people, as even venture people, do a particularly great job of building the value case for most management teams. And I say this because in part of my life, I'm actually a CEO, a co-CEO of a fairly large industrial company. And I know what I put people through. And I know this is going to sound terrible to all of you. I deliberately annoy the daylights out of them on the hope that they freaking go away and they don't make me spend the money. Okay. And let's be real, that is the mindset. Now, maybe you think I have to be knocked off and the next generation has to come through, but frankly, it's because people generally are not being taught as they develop technologies how to create the value case for why they're so important and why they have to be done. So we're trying to teach our CEOs in every one of our portfolio companies. If you can't show me how I'm saving 25%, don't make the speech.
Mhm.
And we've got to build that into how we're all doing technology. You know, if you're doing something where you're creating the next drug, it's probably easy enough because first of all, we know the big drug companies are so screwed up, they desperately need you.
Yes,
Let's be honest, if they could do their jobs right, they wouldn't need you.
correct.
And they admit it, by the way. It's not like I'm saying anything nobody's ever heard. But the reality is most people don't really build that hard ass value case. And we as technology leaders have to start building that. Otherwise, the technologies won't get adopted.
I agree. And I think it's about storytelling, right? You gotta be a good storyteller to be able to do that. Thanks so much for putting the panel together,
Thank you.
Marty, and thanks for everyone being here.